Good evening, welcome to the preview video for the Gauge Guild and Evening with me, Rob Pulham, talking to you about lathes and milling machines and the parts that I've made for my railway models using those machines. Starting with something simple, these are a pair of discharge pipe caps for a rectangular tar tank that I recently made for a friend. The bar was turned, drilled and counterbored in the lathe before being transferred to a square collet block for the flats to be milled upon it. Most of the parts that I make are either to add details that are missing or to replace poor castings. These are replacements for some missing Great Northern Railway tender tank vents. Missing in so much as I misplaced one of the white metal castings in the kit, so I decided to make a pair of replacements. I have 3 Great Northern Railway tenders to build, so I ended up doing 3 pairs. The 2 outer pairs sit flush on the tank top, whereas the inner pair fit on the top of the sloping sides of a self-trimming tender. Flush with the success of those, I couldn't resist having a go at the slightly more complex Stania versions. It saves me cleaning up the castings. Talking of poor castings, this tank filler was ill-defined and undernourished when compared to the measurements on the general arrangement drawing, so I turned a replacement. Additional details were added from scrap etch. The difference in size is more apparent in these views. Another example of a pretty poor casting is this vacuum cylinder, which again is undernourished and poorly formed when compared to its replacement. Note the odd placement of the studs. These were copied from the drawing and generated a bit of discussion at the time. When machining anything, thought needs to be given to the best way to hold the part safely and securely, and the order of operations which are needed to add the features that you desire on the finished part with the minimum number of setups. Admittedly, the latter is less important in the home workshop than an engineering workshop. This slide shows a split arbor turned from a piece of aluminium and was used to hold a casting for machining. This slide shows the 2 castings and the bottom one shows where I needed to machine them. This was because the bottom spigot was far from round and the base of the flange wasn't flat either. This slide shows how the casting was held in the split arbor, which in turn was held in a collet for machining. The final slide in this section shows the 2 vent castings in place on the tank top, along with the filler that I showed earlier. The next few slides were taken when machining some lamp irons from a brass pin rescued from an old appliance plug. The first couple of photos show taking a dust cut to zero the quill or Z-axis on the mill. This controls the up and down movement via a very fine feed, with each increment of the dial being 0.03 mm. Several cuts were made to get down to depth, and then I used a small hand vise as a vise stop to allow me to take the part out of the main vise and turn it over before doing further machining. The vise stop allows me to put the part back in exactly the same place. After further machining the overall shape, I used a slitting saw to create the individual lamp irons. A few more cuts and the lamp irons were left with a sliver of brass retaining them to the main body. I did this deliberately to stop them flying off into space. And here we have the individual lamp irons after a bit of cleaning up with a file. Next, we have a similar sequence which shows the individual cuts in a bit more detail of the more common type of lamp iron with a lower fixing bracket. Again, slit into separate lamp irons with a slitting saw. And finally, cut into individual lamp irons and touched up again with a file. Moving on to even smaller things, this is a whistle that I made for an LNER D2. It's made from 2 small turnings for the bell and microbore tube filed into a hex shape mounted on a central shaft. This picture uses the obligatory 5p piece to give an indication of scale. It really is quite small. This is the form tool that I made for turning the bell for the whistle. I will be talking about the making of form tools in the live session. In a similar vein, this is a globe lubricator that I turned, again using a form tool to create the main shape. This is all from one solid piece. Tiny, isn't it? Says it all really. While I was making the globe lubricator that I've just shown, a fellow modeller described an alternative where he had made them by buying brass ball bearings via eBay and then drilling them out before adding other details like nuts, etc. Not really knowing what to expect, I bought a couple of different sizes, 2mm and 2.5mm. As it turned out, the slightly bigger ones made the more balanced look to the lubricator. As ever, the challenge was holding them in the lathe to drill them. In this case, I got a short length of brass tube, slit it down one side, and then popped the ball in before holding it in a collet. Tightening up the collet, squashed the tube slightly, thus stripping the ball. As I mentioned, one of the key difficulties in machining any parts is working out how to hold them safely and securely. In this section I am using two V-blocks face to face to hold round bar so that I can fly cut each end. These will ultimately become the flanges for the steam pipes, with the fly cut faces sitting against the Princess smoke box. This is in real time, so you can see that it doesn't take long to fly cut the end of the bar. Another way to hold things for machining is to use a superglue arbor. In this section I am turning thin backing plates for the steam pipe flanges. I first faced off some 10mm nickel silver bar and then cut some 10.5mm squares of 0.2mm nickel scrap etch. Each square is then superglued to the end of the nickel bar and allowed to set. I tend to leave it about 30 minutes to be sure. Then, taking small cuts, gradually turn the square into a round, in this case taking the final size down to 9.5mm. Once the turning is complete, the thin plate can be released from the arbor, either by gently heating it or dipping it in acetone. If you are heating it, take care not to breathe in the fumes as they are poisonous. Again, this video is being recorded in real time and each square of nickel takes around about 3 minutes to turn by taking very gentle cuts along the way. Apologies if this is a bit boring to watch, but it's you can see the minute amounts that I'm turning the hand wheel just to increase the depth on each pass. If you try and take too much off at once, the super glue has a tendency to give way and the part pings off into space. Once you get down to size, use a file to remove any burrs, taking care always to use a file with a handle so you don't have any accidents. Following the machining operations, here are the steam pipe sleeves and backing plates prior to riveting and assembly. Before removing the turned disc from the superglue arbor, I use a centre drill to drill out the locations for the rivets around the perimeter of the disc. For ease, I use my Proxon mini pillar drill and dividing head to carry out this task, but I could have easily used the mill and a rotary table. It just takes a bit more to set up. And here they are when assembled and test fitted on the locomotive. I hope that's given you a flavour of the many things that it's possible to make to enhance your models using a lathe and milling machine. Thanks very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the 26th of April for the live session, where I will share a bit of history of how I got into machining and a flavour of my journey of learning, first how to use a lathe and then subsequently the milling machine. Thanks very much.